What's up, you guys? Sean Ross Sapp here, managing editor of Fightful.com. It is October 26th. We have a busy weekend ahead with UFC Sao Paulo and a huge weekend next weekend. I am joined by James Lynch. James, I got to put you and Joe Hulbert and David Tees and even Showdown Joe over. We've had a ton of stuff on the site the last week and a half. We're stepping it up. We've been primarily known as a wrestling website. Your hire was one of the reasons why we wanted to push harder into MMA, and you all have been scoring.
Well, thank you. It's been fun. Lots of cards going on right now. We've got the UFC card this weekend. We've got Bellator coming up soon. We've got the UFC 217 card. So just keeping busy and just pumping out that content, man. That's what you got to do.
Yeah, this week is like a quietly busy week because the Anthony Joshua fight. Then there's the UFC Sao Paulo, which myself and Joe will actually cover next Tuesday. But next weekend, my God, there's the Bellator show, heavy on the amateur wrestlers, and we talked to a bunch of them, from Ryan Bader. We talked to Ed Ruth. I know that you have the two contenders in the women's title fight, and as well as Ryan Bader and Vassell, because the Vassell interview is up on Fightful.com right now. Lots of stuff coming from there. Can't wait. And then Sunday night, Impact Wrestling, Bound for Glory. I think I'm going to do a podcast after that, guys, so make sure you tune into that. And, of course, visit Fightful.com. Use our forums. We have everything you could want there. But what did you get a chance to be on or listen to the media call yesterday?
I just read the notes. I tend to kind of avoid those just because I find that, personally, I find that you're not going to get too much stuff from the call just because you have to wait in line. So I'm the guy who, after the fact, will read all the quotes and kind of get up to speed on things. But it didn't seem like I missed too much yesterday, other than, of course, the whole Joanna, stuff with her and Rose basically was the sort of the big highlight from that.
They were pissy patties on that call. They were upset. You can tell these people are like about ready to lose a significant portion of their body weight ahead of next weekend's fight. They were just unhappy. What did you think of them, like, kind of separating from GSP and Bisping? Because you know what's going to dominate the call if GSP and Bisping are on it.
Yeah, I like that. You have to remember that this card is pretty stacked. I mean, you've got the Garbrandt and Dillashaw fight. You have the Rose and Joanna fight. So, I mean, they should be showcasing some of the other fights, and you don't want it to be overshadowed by GSP. Now, I know, they're saying ticket sales aren't great, but at the same time, you got to utilize all the cylinders that are on this card, and I think it was a good call by the UFC doing that.
I do too. Joanna kind of went at Rose, calling her mentally weak. Do you think that maybe that was the right thing to do in light of some of the things that Rose has spoken about in the past?
Yeah, it's kind of a tough line to walk. I got to admit, I know a lot of people came to the defense of Rose, and I totally get that. And certainly I'm not trying to downplay, mental health issues. I think it's tough because, a lot of times you need to sell a fight, and sometimes you have to say things that may or may not cross the line. I think the intent by Joanna wasn't to make fun of those who are mentally, have mental health issues. I think the intent was just gamesmanship. And sometimes it's like comedians, sometimes the intent isn't there to be mean or malicious. It's there, to get a laugh. And in this case, I think it was there to try and build up this fight. And maybe not the best choice of words, especially with what she said, a couple weeks back on the MMA Hour. But at the same time, it's just her trying to build up the fight. So I do sympathize for Rose, but at the same time, I get that it's gamesmanship as well.
Yeah, I'm with you on the waiting until after the media call thing. Like, I hate waiting for those. David Tees covers them for us. You all can always check that out at Fightful.com. But usually, almost every time they schedule it, I have an interview or a podcast or something going on at that point. And then you always get that person at the beginning who asks like 7 questions in a row. And I'm like, no, I don't care about MMATurdTribune.com and their 7 questions. Stop it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very frustrating. I haven't found them that beneficial. I know some people love them. Personally, I just avoid them and get sort of the afterthought. And I'm more a fan of like the in-person press conference. Like if you can go to that, that's always good. Like the GSP Bisping one we had a couple weeks back, that was perfect. That's great.
I found more use for them when I worked for a wrestling-only website, and if I were to get like 1 or 2 answers in there, I could run that as my MMA story. We would run 1 MMA story a day. So I could just use those quotes that they gave me. Like John Jones had said that he wanted to retire at like 31 or something, and then he changed his mind. And I asked him about that on a call. I was able to run with that as a full MMA story and stuff like that. But nowadays it's a lot of the same things, and UFC has these guys doing so much media that they're almost unnecessary. I will say New Japan Pro Wrestling, I love the way that they did it. They they use the WebEx platform where they had their PR guy, Sean Graben, who's very, very good. And we would just submit questions to him. But the thing was, like, you would think that they would like extremely vet them and like not ask anything that would maybe not be favorable towards them. They asked everything, like anything, like Kenny Omega possibly going to WWE, things like that. I think that maybe that might be a good method for the UFC to try, because Rose went off on a guy because he said, "We haven't seen you be creative in your last few fights." And she was like, "What the hell are you talking about? I'm in there fighting another person. I'm creative every time I'm in there."
Yeah, it is a little difficult to kind of set that stuff up. And obviously, the point of these is to get really good content, right? So sometimes if you have media members waiting in line and they're sort of going through the run of the mill, it's a little bit difficult. Generally, I know that, the UFC is in favor of the media stuff just because it kind of gets things moving. But I mean, you and I deal with Bellator a lot. I really like how the way they do sort of the individual ones where they kind of go in a rotation. Yeah. And that just is so much easier because you get your time with it. It's a little bit shorter usually, but then, you know exactly how much time you have and you can kind of, maneuver around it. So I'm a big fan of that format personally, as far as getting content for an upcoming card.
So Joanna, we'll skip ahead a little bit and we'll talk about this more next week, obviously.
Yes. Yeah.
Am I wrong in thinking already this is the greatest female MMA fighter of all time?
Oh, you're not off at all. I mean, we've seen it firsthand, just what she's able to do, not only in the cage. I believe if she beats Rose, she'll break Ronda Rousey's record, right? Ronda's title defense record, I think, was 5.
She'll tie it. I think she'll tie it.
She'll tie it. Right. So, I mean,
she said that she wanted to break it and then entertain the idea of moving up to 125, but now she's kind of backpedaled on that and said, "I'll do whatever I want to do."
Yeah, well, she has that luxury, right? I mean, she's not just defeating her opponents, she's destroying them. I mean, we just saw what Jessica Andrade did to Claudia Gadelha, and I mean, it just goes to show, like, what Joanna is capable of. If anyone wants to question, the level of competition or anything, just look at what she's doing to her opponents, and then look at how the opponents are doing outside of that. I mean, it's kind of a musical chairs as far as the contenders, because of course, Claudia lost to Joanna in the rematch. She goes out there, destroys Carolina. Then Claudia loses to Jessica Andrade. So it's like, but the common factor here is that, Joanna is beating her opponents very decisively. And we're getting to the point where, we are sort of running out of contenders, but it's just showing how dominant she is. And it's kind of a gift to the UFC. And I'll explain why, is that, oftentimes when you have champions where they're not American, they're not, homegrown or whatever, it's difficult to sort of break that barrier with fans. And Joanna is probably one of the few who's really been able to do that in sort of it's hard to explain. Like, she's very intense, but she's also very, she's got this very sort of warm personality as well too, where you kind of love hearing the quotes and everything else. So I think it's really just a slam dunk with Joanna, and the UFC, I'm sure, is taking advantage of it every way they can.
Her Instagram is one of my favorite follows because she looks so mischievous all the time. She's in these like crazy places with the same look on her face, looking like she's up to something. To me, the conversation is, it's either, and from a technical standpoint, Ronda Rousey's nowhere close. But as far as accomplishments and accolades, Ronda Rousey, Chris Cyborg, Fuji, or Joanna. And obviously the talent level today is much higher than it was from even 2013 to 2015 during Ronda Rousey's reign. But you look back at the people that she beat, it's like Miesha Tate, Sarah McMahon, Sarah Kaufman, Alexis Davis, Julia Budd, who had success up until like recently. Like all these outside, actually, she still is having success. She's the Bellator women's featherweight champion now.
Yeah.
So like you see that, and I hate that people discount her so much because of her last 2 fights and her lack of technical ability. But to me, and it's weird to think that Joanna, who is still very much in her prime by all indications, is just the greatest because she emerged onto the scene so quickly. But women's MMA is in such a place where I think that can happen.
Well, here's the one thing that people don't want to talk about with Ronda Rousey, and I'll bring it up right now, is just the fact that, if Ronda Rousey's fighting anyone outside those 2 fighters, she probably wins. I mean, if Ronda Rousey's fighting, most fighters that don't have, really heavy knockout power, I think she probably wins. And that's the thing, is that, we tend to focus on these losses because stylistically, those were nightmare matchups for her. I mean, we know her weakness, and we know the fact that, I mean, I say this all the time, the worst thing that happened to Ronda Rousey is she fell in love with her stand-up after beating Betch Kahea. If that never happened, maybe she's focusing more on her ground game and utilizing that. And I think, just her attitude in general, it's like she could have gone one way. Imagine if she would have lost to Holly and said, you know what, I'm going to change camps. I'm going to go, I'm going to, give Holly all the credit in the world. Just imagine how different things could be right now, right? But instead she sort of, went into hiding. And of course she had the disaster fight with Nunes. So I don't want to totally display, downplay Ronda's accomplishments. But Joanna right now, she's, a big part of where she's at is not only her attitude, but just the fact that she's, going in there and just having a great attitude in general towards fighting.
Ronda Rousey now at the WWE Performance Center working out. So that's something, guys, you all need to watch out for. Of course, Fightful has a bunch of exclusives up on that. Michael Bisping has a lawsuit filed against him ahead of UFC 217. There's no word. There are rumors that maybe he got arrested, but people are still working to find that out. A person in a gym this past July said that Bisping allegedly choked him in a 24-hour fitness gym in Anaheim, California for taking his weights without asking during a workout and dropped the "you don't know who I am" line. What are your thoughts upon hearing this news, and what kind of a distraction do you think this may or may not be ahead of UFC 217?
I don't think it's going to be a distraction. The timing's obviously interesting. If this happens in July and we're only hearing about it now, how interesting. He's got a fight coming up, right? I don't know who to believe. I mean, in these situations, I think TMZ initially ran that he was arrested. Now they're saying he, it's kind of, there's a bit of a gray area there. So I'd like to get the facts out with all that. Is it going to affect him in this fight? One thing, I'm not a big Michael Bisping fan, I'll be honest, but one thing I will give him credit for is he is pretty mentally strong. I mean, you look at some of the fights where he was supposed to lose and he came through, you got to give him credit for that. And I think something like this, I don't think it will be a distraction. I think he knows that, as far as the trash talk goes, he's pretty much annihilating George St. Pierre on that front. He's very cerebral when it comes to, the trash talk and everything else. So I think that will carry on also from this. I don't think it's going to be much of a distraction, and he can deflect it as much as he wants. He's on, he's on, Fox Sports and everything. He's good when it comes to answering questions. I think he's just going to deflect and go out there and take care of business as usual.
Where do you think this pay-per-view lands? Because we've heard about ticket sales maybe not being as hot as they'd like. The media is just ramping up. I think UFC is starting to learn that really the last week and a half to 2 weeks is when to ramp it up, because a lot of times they would get Conor McGregor or Ronda Rousey out there 3 or 4 weeks before. And even Conor McGregor said, hey, I'll fight in December, but I'm not doing any media if that's the case. Do you think that this media schedule is going to be permanent? Like, do you think they're going to go with this method moving forward? And how do you think pay-per-view will be affected for UFC 217?
I don't really think it matters how they do their media going ahead of this. At the end of the day, if people are interested in this card, I don't think the media necessarily plays a big role in it. I think the mistake that people are maybe not looking at, maybe they are looking at, is that you've got this fight in New York, which I get, big MMA market, you're going to have people coming out. But I happen to wonder how this fight would have done if it was in the UK, for Bisping, or if this was in Montreal for George. I mean, people talk about the last Montreal card where the Bell Center's closed off. I mean, that's not happening if George St. Pierre is headlining that card. I think that while you're not going to make as much money from a bigger market like New York, you're still going to get a better turnout and people are going to be more interested. So from an attendance standpoint, I think they kind of missed the ball on this one, because I just think, the people who are fans now of MMA, especially the newer fans, they don't know much about George St. Pierre. I mean, he fought in 2013. So from that perspective, I don't think it's much. But I think in general, I think the way you sort of build, fights in general, I don't necessarily think is the press stuff. I think it's more of, the cards themselves and the interest and, sort of the storylines going into it. And I don't know if necessarily the media plays a huge role in that. I could be wrong about that, but I didn't get that sense. And one thing I will say quickly is just that it felt to me like this was kind of rushed as far as the press tour and everything else. I mean, I asked Dana White at the presser when he was in Toronto, why didn't they do this at a bigger venue in Toronto? I mean, you have all these Canadian fans. I know people who would have flooded to the Eaton Center if they would have done it there. I don't know if it wasn't available or what the deal was, but I remember when they had Connor and Aldo do their press stop in Toronto, the Eaton Center was packed. It's one of the biggest malls in Toronto. Why didn't they do it there? They had it at the Hockey Hall of Fame with maybe 20 people, 20 fans let in. There's a bunch of fans outside that couldn't get in. Why are you not taking advantage of that? So to me, it looks like disorganization on their part. And I think there could have been some tweaks made on this tour, preferably some more notice that would have made a difference.
What did you think of the answer that he gave you there? Because I heard that, and he really tried to just be like, hey, stop asking that, James. Like he deflected. He deflected hard. Like, haha, special circumstance. Oh, hey, one of those. And it's like, man, you could have sold tickets to this even.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the answer he gave me was, oh, it's a Hockey Hall of Fame. And I get it. Hockey Hall of Fame, beautiful venue. I mean, I've been there a couple times. You know, if you're a hockey fan, and even if you're not, it's just a nice venue. But come on, I mean, you've got arguably the biggest star. Oh, no, not arguably, the biggest star in Canada as far as, you know, MMA fighters go. And you're putting them in a small venue. It just doesn't make any sense. Like, they could have probably even done this at the Air Canada Center, to be honest, and fans would have come, taken time off work and gone. That's how much of a star GSP is. And I think that they missed the boat on that, especially because I had friends who were, you know, messaging me being like, is this presser open to the public? And I'm like, from the initial email, it said no. Then they tweeted out, oh, well, you know, we'll let selected fans. And you can't do that. You got to take advantage.
Yeah, I think that's a rough look. It's a bad look. And I think that we've talked about it time and time again. They go with the hot hand, and right now there's no real hot hand for Toronto or Canada, but I think they can still make a push. I still think that Canada will show up if you put a good card on. There are fight fans there. Like, you mean to tell me that 15, 16,000 of those 50-something thousand fans that were there for that big show aren't going to come for a big pay-per-view? Of course they will. I mean, they did for not a big pay-per-view a couple recently. So yeah, that's one. And I'm interested to see how these markets play out. One I'm really interested in is Darren Till after his performance. I did not expect that. There was nothing in his last two fights that indicated to me that he would put away Donald Cerrone that quick. First off, I'll ask you about Donald Cerrone. Will he ever be the Donald Cerrone again that we saw last year and prior?
I don't think so. I think we saw in this fight, and not to take anything away from Darren Till, but I think at this point, Cowboy, I think, has reached his ceiling, and I think at this point, it's not going to end well for him. I think that, you know, the thing that we love about Cowboy is the wars that he's been in, and is the fact that he's not afraid to stand and bang. But that adds up. I mean, we've seen that with a lot of fighters. You know, Diego Sanchez comes to mind, where we've seen sort of the downward spiral of his career, and I think Cowboy is slightly getting into that territory at this point. Now, look, here's the thing. I mean, you know, Cowboy, oftentimes when he gets to these big fights, it doesn't happen for him. And now he's getting fights where, I mean, in reality, that should have been a lot closer of a fight, and it wasn't. I mean, it was, and granted, Till's improved significantly since his last fight, but I just don't think, I think Cowboy's now in that sort of that Matt Brown territory where, like, maybe he wins, you know, a fight by a knockout, or maybe he gets knocked out himself. I mean, I just think for him that the wars add up. It's a young man's sport, and even though Cerrone isn't that old in fight years, he's very old.
So to me, like, I watched UFC 5 back in the day. I thought it was a pro wrestling tape. Bought or rented it or whatever, liked what I saw, that was cool, but never really followed it. I was a kid. 2003 or 2004, I'm shown clips of Pride and Rampage is power bombing people and these pro wrestling moves. I was like, that's cool. Would follow along with results. It wasn't until January or whenever Rampage debuted in UFC, started to follow religiously. So when the Chuck Liddells would get knocked out and pushed out of the sport, or Rich Franklin, even though he's kind of a local guy and had a connection to him there, I never felt that, like, damn, this is sad type of thing. I've watched Donald Cerrone's, like, entire, like, national career, from WEC to UFC to fighting 4 or 5 times a year, like 35 something fights I've watched him compete in. When I saw him get hit and, like, turn away, that was sad to me. Like, that was me thinking, like, seeing something that I was like, man, I can't believe I'm seeing this. And, you know, I've seen it before out of him. Like, he'll get kicked to the body and he'll double over. But that can happen to anybody. You get hit with the old pant shitter kick, it's going to happen. Like, you're not going to be able to just walk away from that. But the 2017 year for Donald Cerrone has really put that sense of concern and worry in my head, especially with him talking about his battles with sinusitis, which I've had to deal with that too. Like, him speaking about it, like, and I was like, oh, I have that symptom. I have that symptom. I have that symptom. Oh, go to the doctor, and that's what's going on. And it can be really, really tough. He's got to, like, clear out his nose every single day. He's got a lot of battles, not to mention concussion issues and all that. I think we are in Matt Brown territory, and that's sad because, I mean, his last win was over Matt Brown, ironically.
Yeah. One thing I'd like to point out.
How do you think he'll be used moving forward?
Well, here's the thing too that no one really talks about with Cerrone is that, and I remember, I'll never forget this. He was on the Joe Rogan podcast before he fought Rafael dos Anjos, and of course this was a huge opportunity for him because he had won, I think 5 straight or 6 straight or something. That was when he was fighting like 5 times a year or something crazy like that. And I remember Joe asking him about his routine leading up to the fight, and he says, you know what, I still drink Budweiser. I don't take care of myself, whatever. I'm still going wakeboarding, I'm doing all these things. Like if you don't keep care of yourself, like to a certain degree, if you don't get the proper rest and all that, Cowboy, people always say, oh, that's just Cowboy. That's just, how he does things. That stuff adds up. I think that's another thing that people aren't really looking at is that, he's not exactly living like a perfect sort of, healthy life, leading up to things. And I think that is also playing a role in that your body catches up to it. I mean, if you're putting that much stress on your body, I think it does add up. And especially the damage he's taken in the last couple fights. He's definitely in that territory now, I think, with Matt Brown. And it's funny because when he fought Lawler, I don't think we really thought that, but it just takes one fight like this where you really sort of the magnifying glass is really on there, and now you wonder like, hey, how's he going to look in his next one? We really don't know at this point. It could be just like the Till fight, or maybe he survives, but either way, he's not getting to that next level. I think that's one thing we can both agree on.
Yeah, maybe Till's a world beater for all we know. Like it could be like that. Like when Tony Ferguson was stopping fools early on, like we didn't know what he was going to become. Maybe Till is that. Here's the thing that stands out in my mind. He has a pretty solid base pay, I'm sure, on his new contract, but he's losing these fights, but he's not losing and getting a $50,000 bonus. He's not, and we know how he burns through money. He is very transparent about that. So he's the type of guy that I think that Dana White would have to force to retire if he is to retire. It's, but I think that if they tried that, he would probably just go fight in Bellator. Like, well, maybe, because he didn't even entertain a Bellator offer.
No, I know. I think, I don't know if he would, I don't know if he'd go anywhere. I think it's either he stays in the UFC. I think if the UFC's smart, you use him as like a brand ambassador somewhere, because he's like Mr. Hey, I'm going to go have a beer with you type guy or whatever.
Well, they held him to Forrest Griffin, and I was like, of him of all. But then I see these videos of him showing these guys what things do at the UFC Performance Institute. And I was like, oh, okay, there's the difference. He takes his job seriously. Yeah. Like where Chuck Liddell and Matt Hughes were kind of like mascots, Forrest Griffin is like, how can I maximize what you all are paying me? How can I make myself worth it? Yeah.
No, it's true. It'd be interesting to see what happens because, there's two sides of it. I see him, wanting to hold on as long as he can, the cowboy pride, this and that, saying, hey, I'll go down with my shield type thing. And then I see the other side of it where the UFC might say, look, you've done a lot for us. You've fought a lot for us. You've bailed us out a lot of times. We're going to give you a really good position. How would you like to be, how would you like to go to, I don't know, New York and, go do a fan greet and we'll pay you X amount of dollars. I think that would be appealing to him as well. So hopefully, he falls in one of those categories and sort of does the right thing. But I guess, his coaches and everything, I would hope they would, step in and say, hey, look, we know when it's time, it's time.
You think they're going to get him to drink Modelo beer or whatever the hell it is that they got going now?
I don't know. I think there might be some backlash on that. He seems kind of picky about that.
He does. He really does. So Darren Till, man, he couldn't have looked better. He could not have looked better. He's one that you got to watch now. Launched himself immediately into the UFC top 10 in that welterweight division. Now, this was something that I compared a lot to the lightweight division. It seemed like just a few months ago, the last time that Tyron Woodley defended his title when he revealed he had a shoulder injury. It's like, okay, yeah, well, the division needs time to sort itself out. All of a sudden, man, this division is just back rolling. You got Carlos Condit ready to fight. You got Dos Anjos and Lawler. You got Till winning this big fight. Covington and Maia. Kamaru Usman's going to fight now. Like, this division is getting really hot really quick.
It certainly is. And this was we talked about this before the fight, this is the best case scenario for the UFC. I mean, if Cowboy would have won, how many more fights does he have left? Really? I mean, let's be honest. He's getting up there.
10 to 15.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But I mean, like, does he get to that title shot? Probably not. If I'm a betting man, he probably never has another title shot. Yeah. Darren Till, on the other hand, young guy, really good record, very entertaining style. And the key here, the key thing, he is, a guy that they can market in the UK, and that's something they haven't had, since, basically, well, Bisping's kind of their guy right now, but I feel like they're not really pushing that angle with him since he lives in California now. But you go before that, it was Dan Hardy. They'd have not had someone to really sort of say, hey, this is our guy. They tried that kind of with Ross Pointon. Ross Pointon. I'm getting him mixed up with the guy that was on Bisping's season. Who's the other guy? Ross
Pearson?
Yeah, Pearson's the one I meant. Yes, Ross Pearson's the guy I meant. Ross Poynton was the guy who was on Bisping's season of The Ultimate Fighter. How I got that mixed up, no idea. Anyways, that's what I think they wanted with Ross Pearson, and that hasn't gone according to plan. So now you have Darren Till, who I think could sort of be that guy. He was talking a lot of crap, leading up to this fight. That's good too. I think he's a guy that you could put on a regional show, kind of like a lower tier show, but he's sort of the attraction and then the guy that you build a card around now in the UK. And I think this is a good scenario for the UFC, especially trying to build stars overseas.
So as I look through this welterweight division, also Santiago Ponzinibbio and Mike Perry. Mike Perry's run-in after that was maybe my favorite thing, because the camera just pans over and Mike Perry is on the apron just stalking, just trying to get into the cage. That was a moment. That was a very cool moment. And all I did, I Twitter searched Mike Perry, and just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of mentions on a show in the middle of the afternoon on Fight Pass. Yeah. That did not happen a lot. There's not that kind of buzz very often.
Why wouldn't they, why wouldn't they rebook that fight? I mean, Ponzinibbio, all the power to him. He's done a great job, but you have this storyline, build it up. This fight might not happen now because Till might fight someone else. You might lose. I mean, you got to take advantage of these things. And like you mentioned, you did the Google search. I mean, people know about it. Take advantage of it. I think they gotta. I know people are gonna say that's too much like pro wrestling, but that's the people get invested in fights when there's storylines, and I think that's sort of something that the UFC's kind of missed the boat on. And that fight's in Winnipeg of all places. It's like, I love Winnipeg, I love Canada, but come on, like they got to do something with Mike Perry here.
Well, hey, to compare it to pro wrestling, last Friday the WWE had a ton of people go down with the mumps, and they replaced their guys with people who were perhaps more interesting. Immediate buzz like I had never experienced before in a breaking news fashion for a replacement on a show. So it can work. I think the benefit of this is if Mike Perry wins, loses, draws, no contest, people are still going to want to watch him fight Darren Till because he's Mike Perry. He is, I think, the new Donald Cerrone of this division, like maybe to a little more extreme of a degree. We are asked by somebody, is there any scenario in which Donald Cerrone could get a title shot again? I think, if somebody misses weight, that's about it.
Yeah, that's the only one. Yeah, because, I mean, the welterweight division's too stacked. He's not going back down to 55. I mean, he made it pretty apparent there. And plus 55 is already a logjam as it is. So it would only be that scenario. I don't think there's any other way at this point. I mean, he's lost 3 in a row. That's a career high for him. I don't think he's ever lost 3 straight fights in his career. So he's really got to get a win. Yeah,
I think that if they went and say Woodley was facing Wonder Boy and Wonder Boy missed weight and couldn't fight for the title or got sick, they would be like, okay, Donald. But, they have a couple of other options in that regard too. Dos Anjos doesn't have to cut a lot of weight. Alex Oliveira doesn't have to cut a lot of weight. This welterweight division is being I don't want to say overtaken, but there's a lot of former 155ers there that could really benefit from a situation like that occurring. But I love the way this division is coming along, where it looked like it was going to be slim pickings for a while. So that was a big one for the UFC. Darren Till. I had a friend message me, and he said, why haven't I heard about Darren Till until now? And this is the night before the fight. And I said, to be honest, I barely heard about him, and it's my job to hear about him. He's won, but he said, I'm watching his early fights. He's so humble. And I was like, wait till you get to his later ones, because he's not anymore.
Changes his attitude real quick. I do these pros pick videos where I talk to fighters and I ask them their picks on upcoming fights, and you get a variety of answers. But I was surprised with how many fighters didn't know who he was. And they're just like, I don't really know much about him. I'm gonna go with Cowboy just because he's Cowboy, right? But I mean, I found that interesting. And it just goes to show that, sometimes the UFC, when they put a fighter in the main event, they're kind of hoping that people will go back and catch up. I think in a lot of cases, like we've got Marcin Tybura fighting Werdum. I literally am going to have a tough time making this video because 90% of the guys I talk to have no idea about Marcin Tybura, or they get him mixed up with another heavyweight fighter. I mean, it's just that confusing. So it's a struggle for the UFC, and I think they kind of throw these guys in there sometimes just to hope for the best. And like you said with Till, it worked out for the best.
And Tybura might win that fight.
Oh, absolutely,
absolutely. But it's heavyweight MMA to begin with. But that's what I love about it. It's so chaotic. So UFC has a guy in Darren Till that they can help with Europe. That's got to be a positive. They've got a few people. They've got Joanna, who they seem to be just keen on helping with the Polish New York market. And she's very cognizant of that. She's very aware of that. You have Conor McGregor, but will he ever really fight in Europe? Gain Europe interest? Sure. But they're going to fly over to watch him fight by all indications. Is there anybody else that you look at besides maybe Khabib that can really capture like Russia or any European market? Because we saw Bellator attack this heavily, but they never really capitalized on what they had.
I'm not sure. I think it's really difficult in this day and age to build a superstar unless you're a self-promoter like a Conor McGregor or someone like that. Khabib, apparently, from what I hear, my good friend Kareem Zidane, who does a lot of investigation on Russian MMA, he seems to think Khabib will never fight in Russia. I think it has to do with the payday. I think that he'll end up making more money if he fights in the States. So I think that's something to keep an eye on, because he does have a huge following. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it as well. You know, anytime I even do like an interview with a Russian fighter, the hits on the videos are just insane, because they just have a huge fan base. I thought Kevin Lee could have been that guy if he would have won. He's still young. There's still a possibility of him sort of being the next big thing, because I feel like people either really love Kevin Lee or they hate him, which is a good thing. Max Holloway, I think there's potential there. He's kind of too much of a nice guy, but you do a show in Hawaii and we'll see sort of the superstardom that he can build there. Maybe something similar to like a BJ Penn and what he sort of accomplished in Hawaii as well. Cody Garbrandt, I think, he's still relatively young, but the thing with Garbrandt is, man, he came off so bad on The Ultimate Fighter. I really think that, that was supposed to be the show that was going to propel this rivalry up. And like, people are kind of over it with the injury and everything, and I think Garbrandt just, he hasn't really captured people, because the one thing they don't even focus on is he's from Ohio, and how many, UFC, like Stipe is probably the only one, that you can kind of pin from there that's really sort of proud of where he's from. Garbrandt, for most people probably think he's from California. So I think that it's going to be tough going forward, but I think the key is the self-promotion. I think they need someone that's going to do it themselves, because for all accounts, and we've talked about this with even Demetrius Johnson, the UFC just does a very bad job of marketing.
I think they're going to keep going to Poland, and if they wanted to do a big show there, I think, well, if Tybura wins, they're going to have maybe the star power to do it. If they went over there, did a big show, Joanna, Carolina, Tybura, I feel Jotko. They have seven. Like, it's kind of surprising to see how many people from Poland they have on their roster. UFC's new next TV platform. This is going to be very, very telling and very interesting. And like WWE's is coming up, UFC's is coming up. Bellator, you don't really got to worry about it because Viacom owns them. Where do you think this is going? What options do they have? Like, this is good stuff, because the world was completely different when they signed the Fox deal.
Yeah, I think that, a lot of people are saying that they might just go with like a streaming service. I think if you ask most MMA fans, they would love a WWE network type model where you pay the fee a month, but you get the pay-per-views in there. I think we're in a day and age where people, they want to, they'll pay the money if it's reasonable. I mean, to expect people to pay $60 for pay-per-view is ridiculous. I mean, the pay-per-view model, in my opinion, is just not the way to go. The subscription-based model, like with Flow Combat and everything else, Flow Sports, I should say, that seems to be the way to go, where you get, a bundle of things all at once, and you're actually getting value for what you're paying for. But with that said, I could kind of see the UFC, trying to hold on to that pay-per-view model as much as they can, because they make a lot of money from it. So they stay with that, and I think they probably end up with Fox. I mean, there's some talks about maybe ESPN. We're seeing ESPN kind of break more news as of late, it seems like, with the UFC. But I have a feeling they're going to go back with Fox, because I think Fox needs them just as much as the UFC needs them.
So when WWE started out, the original plan was everything on there except for Royal Rumble, WrestleMania. I think UFC could really make that work. They could say, 10 to 12 pay-per-views a year on UFC Fight Pass. And then, like, when Conor McGregor fights, that's not included in the package. People are still paying $60 to watch him fight. So they reserve 2 or 3 big giant events. I think that will make way more people subscribe to Fight Pass. Now, really, we've learned that the bottom line for UFC fans has shifted from about 225,000 way down to about 100,000. Like, that's the bottom line you get on that now. Now you have to question, okay, will the amount that we lose out on make up for it? And WWE is at the point where it's almost like break even on that situation, but they still have very limited pay-per-view. But then you get the benefit of having a Conor McGregor and all that stuff. UFC still makes millions off of Mighty Mouse pay-per-views.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that you got to remember. Like, people are like, man, these numbers are so bad. No, Baywatch on pay-per-view in the 90s was bad. That lost money. UFC, when Mighty Mouse fights, still does a lot of money. That's kind of wild for me to even imagine.
Yeah, and that's why they'll stick with the pay-per-view model as much as they can. And I could see them just being greedy and keeping things as they are. And yes, they'll lose fans, but again, if they're making money off this, I mean, they're going to continue to do it. And it's just it sucks for the fans because, you know, we've seen in a million different ways, you know, with what's happening with ESPN and everything, people are changing the way they're consuming content, and they want to be able to customize what they can get, and they want to have value for what they're getting. And so all these things sort of add up and come together. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens, but I think it is sort of one of the biggest decisions we'll see this year as far as what happens with the UFC.
Do you think UFC is going to get into the boxing business?
Yeah, I saw that today. I don't know. Maybe they try that route.
You know, already have those neat Zuffa boxing shirts.
I know. I was there when they had the first when Dana was wearing the T-shirt at the Toronto presser. It was interesting to see that. I don't know. Is there really? I mean, boxing. It's just there. I don't know if the interest is there. I mean, we'll see. I mean, you know, the fact that you have. You know, a sport that's really struggling to sort of build stars. You know, we have this great fight between Triple G and Canelo Alvarez, which ends in a draw. I think people are very sour about the boxing industry as a whole. So I don't know. Do they do it? Maybe, but I don't know. You know, is there going to be a lot of interest? I'm not sure. It seems like MMA fans have a short attention span, and I could see them watching a boxing fight and being like, "This is boring. I have no interest." I mean, I saw people saying that about the Mayweather fight.
So as I think about this and as we talk about this, I'm wondering, I'm like, you know, could the UFC put their own spin on it? Have it in like the small cage as opposed to a ring. Have it where, you know, modify the rules a little bit. Like, have UFC fighters who, you know, are going to be engaged in a stand-up battle box and throw those on an MMA card. Like, I wonder how or if, I mean, at one point they wanted a moat. So, I mean, this sport has had far crazier things. We've seen tag team MMA. Now, granted, this isn't at the top level of MMA or anything, but we've seen tag team MMA. We've seen X-Arm, for the love of God. Do you remember that crap?
Rings a bell, but I don't think I've ever actually seen it. I remember
the arm wrestling where they could punch each other, do flying
okay.
arm bars and stuff, and the dude broke his arm off.
Okay.
Well, not off, broke it, but we've seen crazy stuff happen. And this doesn't sound that crazy to me in comparison. No. I mean, and Yama pit fighting, let's not forget that as well. I mean, there's been some really wild ideas. Yeah, it's possible. I mean, at this point, I think, you know, they're probably a little bit concerned about the numbers, and maybe they want to try something different and spice it up. And, you know, maybe they do like, remember they had, what was it? The Contenders? The Contender was the old boxing reality show they had. They were trying to build like the next superstar. Maybe they try something like that. I don't know. I think it's from what I see from a lot of even hardcore fans, sometimes I think a lot of them find boxing boring, and I think that's going to be something that's going to work against them. I mean, personally, I would consider myself a casual boxing fan. I find it entertaining, but I don't think everyone's like me, and I think it might be a tougher sell, but we'll see what happens. As Stone Osborne says in the live chat, is the UFC looking to do something with Eddie Bravo and his combat jiu-jitsu? Well, it is on Fight Pass, and I think they could make that an attraction too. I think that if they would have had Ronda Rousey grapple Brian Caraway, people would have watched it. Now, I don't, you know, Brian Caraway probably would have held her down forever, but people would have watched that. Like, if it were like an International Fight Week exhibition thing and you put it on Fight Pass, people are going to tune into that. Like, embrace it. Embrace the weird stuff. Like, have an all-star weekend type of thing where you have a 3-point shootout and stuff like that. Like, I like that idea. I think that special things like that can add fans. It can, like, maybe. So what happens if Ronda Rousey pulls an armbar out of nowhere and taps him out? That's going to be on Yahoo News the next day or that day. It's going to be all over the place. Just do something fun and different.
Yeah, like I wish that I'm going to kind of go off on a little bit of kind of off the road here when I say this, but I always wish that I always said years ago when Bellator was sort of in cahoots with MTV, they should have put those Bellator fighters on the challenge. How cool would have that been?
That would have been a great idea.
Pat Curran fighting Johnny Bananas on some challenge or something. Like, granted, there's the injury risk there, but I know like Michelle Watterson, for example, is going to be on the challenge. I'm going to watch that because I think that's cool to see how she does against these reality TV stars. I like stuff like that.
Oh, you know what I miss? Pros versus Joes.
Oh, yes, of course.
So Spike TV is going to rebrand at the end of the year. And before, I got a heavy workload, but I'm trying to work on a long form, slowly but surely, Spike TV retrospective about the original days of it and some of the programming that they had. Pros versus Joes was so great because you saw these people just get dominated that thought that they could just hop off the couch and compete with stars. I remember Bo Jackson walking up and he was like, I haven't picked up a ball bat in 5 years. And he had a 375-foot home run right after that. And I was like, man, you see it. And you would have Randy Couture wrestling people, and you would have Bob Sapp in there running football drills and then punching somebody in the face. Like, it was so cool. I think things like that could raise a profile, maybe show people a side of these guys that they haven't seen before. I think that's a cool idea. But yeah, I love the idea of the challenge. I used to watch that back in the day, and I loved that show. I thought that was great.
Yeah. No, it's a great show. And like I said, I think the Michelle Watterson on there, I don't even know how the UFC let her do that because like, isn't it kind of like going against the enemy because Viacom owns MTV and it seems like a bit of a weird red tape there because CM Punk was on there and I watched that one just because I was curious about it. And
how did he do?
He beat that Johnny Bananas guy on one of the episodes in like an actual challenge, and then I think he got eliminated later. But it was interesting to see him on there because he's kind of got a bit of a rough exterior, so he didn't get along with some of the people there, and I thought that was kind of funny.
Fun fact: I once discussed on a podcast that he didn't have me blocked on Twitter, and I was surprised. The day after that, he blocked me.
Oh wow!
So I don't know if somebody like tipped him off. I really doubt CM Punk was sitting there like, I gotta watch the Sean Ross Sapp podcast today. But the next day, that was kind of awkward. Bellator last weekend, it did 476,000 viewers. Gegard Mousasi beat Alexander Shlemenko. Do you think that was the right call, Mousasi beating Shlemenko? Because it was as divisive as any fight I've seen.
I think Shlemenko won the fight, and this is coming from one of the biggest, Gegard Mousasi supporters dating back to the Pride days. But I think that it wasn't a robbery, if that makes sense. I feel like that second round, it depends. I'd have to sort of watch it again. I think I've watched it twice now. I think I scored it for Shlemenko at the time. Jimmy Smith was very pro Shlemenko as well throughout the broadcast, so that's something to keep in mind too. Maybe just watch it without the commentary. It's tough to say really because I think definitely Mousasi won the first round. That second round's a question mark, and Shlemenko clearly won the third. They're lucky that wasn't a 5-round fight because Mousasi would have lost for sure. Because eye, I mean, you could have even argued that they could have stopped the fight right when his eye was swell. Because he says he can see, but he also, if you saw that, I don't know if you saw that clip at the end where he's trying to hold the cage and he falls down a bit because his eyesight was off. So that's kind of dangerous. I think Shlemenko won the fight. Mousasi sort of got lucky because now they can sell it as, he probably can fight for the title just because they can say he won regardless of what happened and everything else. That's sort of what they want anyways. And, I said this on Twitter and I got a lot of people, kind of giving me the backlash, but I said, hey, let's see Mousasi when he's got two eyes. Now, I'm not taking anything away from Shlemenko by saying that, but I feel like when he has this sort of disadvantage from the get-go, we're not seeing his true skill set. Because I saw people saying he's washed up, he's done. That wasn't the case. I mean, you hit someone right in the eye. I mean, you're really not going to see the true skill set. So let's see how he does in the second fight.
Heather Hardy derailed a bit. She did not look like a high-level boxer in this fight. No. She got hit a lot, and I've made the comparisons to Rousey. I didn't necessarily mean in the ring. I meant as a personality, and 35 years old, you have to wonder her future in this sport because she's competed 20 times as a boxer. Who knows how many more times in the gym she's went hard. I know that she's done a lot of kickboxing in her past as well. She got derailed, but man, Christina looked really good.
Yeah, she did. And they got to take advantage of this. One of the things I was surprised was when Zach Freeman beat Pico, they didn't rebook him right away and really sort of build the hype because I think people are even forgetting he's fighting next week. Why are they not capitalizing on this? The focus on that whole card was Pico's a bust, whatever. why not talk about this guy Freeman, the prospect killer? We're going to throw him in there with someone else. They haven't done that. I don't get it. Freeman's a great guy. I'm sure you've interviewed him. He's just a great personality. Get him in there and hype him. But same sort of thing with Christina Williams. And here's the thing too, Sean. They've got this vacant flyweight title fight coming up between Ducote and Lima McFarlane. Outside of them, you've got the Valerie Letourneau fight against I believe it's Kate Jackson, or I might be butchering that, but she's that's sort of, I think the winner of that will fight next. But after that, it's slim pickings. Get Christina Williams in there. I know she's only got the one pro fight, but let's get her fights as soon as possible and build her up and call her the Heather Hardy killer, and vice versa for Hardy. People are saying, oh, another bad night for Bellator. Well, look, Heather Hardy, she may be old, but that flyweight division is so thin. She gets a win or two, she's right back in the driver's seat, and I think that's what they have to do to generate interest. So
something I posed to Showdown Joe on Saturday. Yeah, I wonder what Christina Williams' contract status is, because you know how Bellator does sometimes. They'll sign these people to these one-fight deals, and they'll overperform. If I'm the UFC, I snatch her up because she looked real good. Like, not just from a she's beating Heather Hardy's perspective, like from a technical perspective. Her footwork looked good. Her punches looked good. Her kicks looked good. I'd be like, go ahead and grab you right now. Maybe we'll throw you on another season of The Ultimate Fighter or Dana White's Contender Series or anything. Like, she looked real good. Like, for a 1-0 fighter, I was very impressed.
Well, she had a great game plan and she stuck to it. And I hate to, take listeners away from our site, but I did have an interview with her on Flow Combat. If you go check it out, she actually signed to a 3-fight deal. So she's going to be with Bellator for a little bit longer. And, I think the biggest thing here is just, capitalize on this. A lot of eyeballs were seen on that. She talked about the fact that she got a lot of feedback on social media. People are really talking about her. She was on Luke Thomas's show on Monday. So, I mean, people are taking notice and they have to gain, take momentum from this and sort of build on it. The same way that I think they made a mistake with Rory beating Paul Daly. Why didn't they rebook him right away for a fight and really keep that hype train going? I liked how they spaced out the cards, but they have to find a way to really, when they have these moments where fighters have a good performance, really sort of keep that momentum going as much as they can.
Neiman Gracie, is it time for him to take a step up in competition? Busha, I thought that I really liked that fight. It was entertaining. He didn't just lay down. He fought Gracie while he was backpacked the entire time. Their entire first round, and then ultimately halfway through the second round kind of had to give in. 7-0 is Neiman Gracie. He's 28 years old. He is 5-0 in the UFC. He had the exposure of being on Bellator NYC. What do you think is next for him, and what kind of ceiling do you see for this guy?
I see a pretty big ceiling. And I think if they're smart, they give him a step up and really start, taking this train and sort of building up the prospect train with him. Similar with Jordan Young with, his win, a couple of weeks back, or was it last week? I can't remember. But Jordan Young's another guy who's undefeated, and they have these prospects, but I don't know why they sort of bury them on the other cards. Try and put them in bigger fights and really sort of build up the name value as far as what they have to offer. Because Bellator hasn't done a great job of building prospects, but they do have these guys that like a Carrington Banks who's really amassed like a good record. And I think in Gracie's case, give him a veteran, give him someone that we're going to remember, because the Zach Busha fight, who by the way was a late replacement, Busha actually earned the contract. They have a thing with Shamrock FC, which is a Missouri-based organization. If you win the title, you get a Bellator contract. So that's how Busha actually got that fight with Gracie. So they have to take advantage of that. And again with Gracie, and just give him a bigger name and then ride that out. We got a Gracie. He's the next generation of Gracies. He's fighting, I don't know who, Brendan Ward or something. Like, give him like a bigger name and then get him towards the title, because they need contenders. And I think, a lot of fans are kind of getting tired of the whole musical chairs with a lot of these fights, where we're seeing guys that are rematching and trilogy fights and everything else.
With the right opponents, I think that Neiman Gracie can be like the next generation's Damian Maia, because we know his grappling is at a world level like that. And I always compare Damian Maia to a knuckleballer in baseball. I think he'll be able to do this until he's like 45 if he can avoid getting hit consistently, because I don't know that his skill is going to decline that much, his bread and butter, but that's one to watch out for. Also, quietly, Kimbo Slice Jr. added to a show in Ireland, in Dublin, that lost who was it? James Gallagher. It lost him. So AJ McKee and Brian Moore are headlining it. But I am most interested to watch Kimbo Slice Jr. because despite his last loss, I've seen a lot of things in his first 2 pro fights and his amateur fight that I thought looked really, really good for somebody at his experience level.
Yeah, and again, I don't know why they're putting these guys in certain markets. You know, like get him in California or whenever they have a show there. You know, sort of build a name up for him, trying to create a fan base, because it really does him no favors. Like I don't imagine there's fans in overseas that are
Yeah.
really really wanting to see Baby Slice compete. So yeah, I'm with you though. I think there's a good ceiling here. The thing they don't want to do is what they've done with Anthony Taylor, which is they have this prospect and they just give him hard fights, and then he has this like 2-4 record. Like they got to slowly build him up, not like what they're doing with Michael Page, but something where it's at least the fair amount of competition till they get to that next level, and take advantage of that last name, because we know that people will show up, especially if they have sort of a brand name like Baby Slice does.
I think, and this is just me speculating, they lost their meal ticket on that show, James Gallagher, which wasn't much of one. It was just he was a Dublin guy, and they had to replace him with AJ McKee. And he's just always willing to fight. Baby Slice is like, he'll fight anybody, late notice, like a couple weeks. I don't know that he's turned down much of anything. A particularly interesting aspect of this fight is his third straight fight in Bellator that has been at 165 pounds catch weight. What do you think that says about that situation, Kimbo Slice Jr. and Bellator being willing to do that?
I think it says that he's taking these short notices fights and they want to make sure he makes weight. And I think that's why you see a lot of catch weight fights. I know, like I mentioned Jordan Young earlier, his last fight was a catch weight of, I think, 195. And it's just because they couldn't find him an opponent. And Alex Hubin, who he fought, was a guy that normally fought at 205. So I think they wanted something where, look, we got to get him a fight, but we're going to have to do it at something that's going to make sense for both guys. And, Jordan Young agreed to the 195. So I think that's the situation. And I think, once they give, Baby Slice a fight where it's, concrete and it's not short notice, I think we'll see him pick a weight class, whether that's welterweight or lightweight.
Also, in speaking to Kimbo Slice Jr. in an interview earlier this year, he gets it. He really gets it. And dare I say that he is already a more technically refined fighter than his father was in MMA, because even though he got caught in that submission in last November, like I said, there were a lot of things I saw and I was like, oh, I didn't expect that out of the son of Kimbo Slice. Like, at any stage, much less in his first amateur fight, his first pro fight, and his first fight coming off of a loss. If you were to ask many people, they would think, just, okay, he's going to lose and then he's probably going to leave MMA because it didn't work out for him. No, I think a lot of what he's done has stood out to me, and shout outs to him for that. I'm being told that UFC is being offered more for their new TV deal than their last TV deal from the offers that they've got in. That's good news.
That's very good news.
It's good news for a lot of people. It's good news for WWE. It's good for UFC. Lots of deals coming up. The combat sports and wrestling landscape is going to be like, there's going to be a lot of news coming out of that. Anything else happening this week? Tell them about the interviews you have coming up on Fightful.com.
Yeah, so I talked to Emily Ducote, who is going to be rematching Alima Lay McFarland for the flyweight title this time. It's a vacant flyweight title fight, and she's just sort of relishing the fact that she's sort of the underdog going into this one. All the focus is on Alima Lay, and I talked to Alima Lay as well. And this is a fight that I think is kind of flying under the radar, but it's going to make history because we forget that they're going to crown a flyweight champion before the UFC will. So that's going to happen next week. And interesting that they fought last year, but I think Ducote's won a couple fights since then. I think she's looked good. I think they wanted Valerie Letourneau to fight for the title, but of course Letourneau was injured in her last fight, so she's now fighting. I believe it's Kate Jackson again. I might be wrong on that, but don't sue me. She's got a fight coming up, so they didn't give her that fight. So it's a fun fight, and I think it'll be tough to say sort of what happens in the rematch because Emily I think has improved. But yeah, sort of the main thing there is just I think that they know they're going to make history, and I think both girls really have worked their way up to this point. Emily's relatively young. She's still coming up, someone sort of a bit of an unknown. And Alima, I mean, she's got all that fame coming into Bellator for beating up the soccer mom, and now she's really looked like a legit talent. I mean, she's undefeated in Bellator, and she markets herself really well. And what the cool thing is, I don't know if you got a chance to talk to her. She's just got a really good personality. And actually, for our listeners, if you watch at the end of my interview, she had a quote on her Twitter about how she's had a tough time dating, and we get into that, and we sort of talk about some of her dating woes. And she's cool. Like, she's a really fan-friendly fighter, and she genuinely likes doing media. And I think if Bellator is smart, again, they really sort of market the hell out of her and do a show in Hawaii maybe because that's where she's from originally, and really sort of push that because she's awesome. And I think someone that Bellator has kind of got lucky with, because she's been, you know, very talented and very successful for them.
This is why I often tell women who are in college and they play sports and they want to continue being, or they want to be a pro athlete, but, you know, there are only so many spots in the WNBA. There are only so many spots as a pro beach volleyball player or in the Olympics or something. MMA is a real opportunity for women who have an athletic background, an athletic foundation. McFarland was an amateur fighter 3.5 years ago, and now she is here at like near the top of Bellator. That's awesome. Cynthia Calvillo wasn't a pro fighter 1.5 years ago. Like, and she's a ranked fighter in the UFC. So we're going to see a lot more of that. We're going to see athletes cross over more. I compare this time, well, really the post-Rousey time, a lot to almost the post-Ultimate Fighter time. That was the time when a lot of athletes were like, oh, MMA is a possibility. The pay has never been quite there to that degree, but I think we're going to see that a lot more. Guys, follow us at Fightful Online on Twitter to get all of our news, at Fightful MMA, at Fightful Wrestle, and of course, subscribe to us YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, Player FM, all over the place. I've got an interview with Diamond Dallas Page. Our full interview is going to release tomorrow. Lots of good stuff there. I know James is a user of DDP Yoga. He's a great dude.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm looking forward to that. I'm a big fan of what he's doing in the whole yoga thing, so I'm excited for that. Sean getting the goods on Fightful. I like it.
Yeah, we filmed it for a List and Your Boy segment, well, several segments, and we got like 8 or 9 out of it, and there's still like so much stuff that we didn't even use. I was like, I'm going to release the whole 45-minute shoot interview, and I'm going to start doing that with all of our filmings that we do, hopefully, but guys, check it out. Showdown Joe talked to Dustin Poirier. We have articles coming from that. And, of course, all the stuff from James Lynch. Joe Holbert talked to Linton Vassell. That's up on the site now. But, guys, like I said, Fightful.com. Use those forums. Talk to us. Until next time, we're out.